The challenge. The transmission arrived just before the dawn of a new day. It was not a signal Earth had ever received before, at least not in recent memory. The screen flickered to life in the war room, and a lone message from the Xenar Dominion, one of the most feared civilizations in the galaxy, was displayed in a harsh red font. Earth's leaders were gathered around the holographic projection, their faces grim with concern. The message was simple yet chilling. A trial of dominance. One warrior from each species. No weapons, no armor, no interference. The strongest survives. The Xenar were infamous across the stars. A brutal, battle-hardened species known for rewriting the very rules of warfare. No one had ever dared challenge their supremacy, but now they wanted to fight humanity. The reason was clear. They believed humans were a threat. A species of insignificant apes who had no place among the stars, much less in the galactic hierarchy. Just one duel. Ambassador Rachel Kwan asked, her voice a mixture of disbelief and worry. What does that even mean? If they win, do we just lose? Do we lose our place in the galaxy? Supreme Commander Elias Grant, a man who had seen the horrors of war, exhaled slowly. No, Rachel. It's not just about losing face. It's a battle of survival. The Xenar believe in the trial of dominance. If we refuse, we admit weakness, and the galaxy will see it as an invitation to destroy us. The room was silent. President Langley, an older man with the weight of 1,000 battles etched into his face, turned his gaze to the darkened window. He had seen too many conflicts and wars to remain hopeful. His hand ran through his graying hair as he tried to process the implications of the Xenar's challenge. What happens if we refuse? He asked. The Xenar envoy, a towering figure covered in thick, reptilian scales, bared its fangs. It was a chilling sight, though not entirely unusual in their species. You admit weakness, the envoy's voice echoed with an otherworldly growl, and the weak do not rule. There was no negotiating. The challenge had been laid, and refusing it would be disastrous. The leaders of Earth were faced with a grim decision. They had no choice but to accept the trial, an invitation to a duel they didn't fully understand. One human against a Xenar warrior. The Xenar's champion, Ki the Unbroken, was a living legend. He was a symbol of power, 3 meters tall, with muscles that could crush steel and skin as hard as the finest armor. The Xenar had never been defeated in this sacred trial, and the very thought of humanity's champion stepping into the ring was laughable to them. They had fought wars for centuries, perfected their combat techniques, and no human could match them. At least, that's what the Xenar thought. A tense silence fell over the room as everyone processed the severity of the situation. Earth's military could offer their best fighters, of course, but they were no match for the might of the Xenar. The soldiers were strong, but they had been trained with rules, honor, and codes of conduct, things that would not matter in this brutal trial. The Xenar would expect them to fight like soldiers, and in that, they would fail. Then, as if the weight of the situation wasn't enough, a figure leaned against the doorframe at the back of the room, causing heads to turn. It was a man who wasn't supposed to be there. Dave Carter, a civilian with no military training, appeared in his usual disheveled state, hair messy, an old Nissa t-shirt clinging to his frame, and a cup of coffee in hand. He yawned, as if he hadn't just walked into a meeting that could change the fate of humanity. "Can I help you?" Commander Grant asked, his tone laced with confusion and frustration. "Just getting a midnight snack," Dave replied casually, taking another sip of his coffee. "Saw the emergency meeting on the news. Thought I'd check it out. What's going on?" Rachel Kwan shook her head, her eyebrows furrowing in disbelief. "Do you have any idea what's happening right now? The Xenar are challenging us to a fight to the death. A trial to determine if humanity is worthy of survival among the stars." Dave shrugged, clearly unfazed. "Yeah, sounds dumb, right?" The Xenar envoy growled in irritation, clearly not understanding why the humans were treating this challenge so lightly. This is a sacred trial, the envoy hissed. The trial of dominance is more than a mere battle. It is the foundation of our civilization. Dave's expression didn't change. Yeah, he said, waving his hand as if to dismiss the Zenar's warning. Look, you guys are all overthinking this. You send a soldier. They'd fight like a soldier. The Zenar have been training for centuries to counter that. But me? Dave grinned, his smile lazy and confident. I fight like a human. You guys don't get it. Ambassador Kwan stepped forward, her patience running thin. What do you mean? We can't just throw a civilian into the ring with a Zenar warrior. Why not? Dave said, his tone nonchalant. I've been in more fights than I can count. No weapons, no rules. Just hands. If you send a soldier, they'll think about strategy, honor, discipline. Me? I'll fight like we fight. We're humans, right? We make decisions on the fly. We don't follow rules. We break them. And the Zenar won't know how to handle that. The Zenar envoy looked at Dave, a flicker of recognition flashing in his eyes. For a brief moment, there was a sense of unease. Could it be? Was it possible that this human was serious? Did they truly have no understanding of fear? I once beat a guy twice my size with a pool cue, a napkin dispenser, and 2 shots of tequila. Dave continued, sipping his coffee as if they were discussing the weather. You're worried about your champion. That's cute. The Zenar envoy was silent for a moment, and then it let out a rumbling laugh, though there was no humor in it. The air grew thick with tension, and the room held its breath. Could this human truly believe he stood a chance? You believe you can match a warrior of the Dominion? The envoy asked, its voice a low growl. Dave didn't flinch. Buddy, he said with a grin, I've got more tricks up my sleeve than you could ever imagine. Ambassador Kwan was speechless. The room was a mix of shock and disbelief, but there was something in Dave's demeanor, something that had been missing from everyone else's approach. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't even worried. His words were simple, yet somehow they carried a weight that none of the trained soldiers or diplomats could match. Do you understand what you're volunteering for? President Langley's voice was a low whisper now, full of concern. The Zenar don't fight for sport. They fight to kill. You could die. Dave stared at the president, his expression unchanged. That's supposed to scare me. He shrugged, looking down at his coffee cup. I'm volunteering for humanity, right? Let's see if they can handle what we've got. And so, just like that, humanity's champion stepped forward. Not a soldier, not a trained fighter, but a man who fought because it was in his nature. A man who understood that sometimes the rules didn't matter. What mattered was humanity's unbreakable spirit, its sheer will to survive, to adapt, and to fight when no one else thought it was possible. As the Zenar envoy stared at him, something flickered in its eyes, something it hadn't expected. This fight wasn't over yet. A human's edge. The tension in the room was unbearable. The Zenar envoy, towering and fearsome, stood there with his reptilian eyes fixed on Dave, scrutinizing him like a predator eyeing its prey. Dave didn't flinch. His arms were casually folded, and the faintest trace of a grin tugged at the corners of his lips. He didn't look like a soldier. He looked like a man who had no idea just how dangerous the situation really was. You are a fool, the Zenar envoy growled, his voice deep and gravelly, echoing with an ancient, unyielding authority. You may believe yourself to be strong, but the Dominion's champion is unlike anything your species has ever faced. The Unbroken is a living god of battle. No one can defeat him. I'm sure he's a tough guy, Dave replied, unfazed, but you don't get it. You're thinking too small. You think like a soldier. You fight for rules, for honor. I don't fight like that. Commander Elias Grant, who had seen countless battles in his life, leaned forward, a hand on his forehead, as if the weight of the decision had suddenly become too much. Dave, this isn't a game. The Zenar are brutal, ruthless, and they won't show mercy. This is a fight to the death. There's no turning back. I get it, Dave said, his voice steady but carrying an unspoken confidence. You all think I'm crazy, right? But you're looking at it all wrong. You see the Xenar as invincible because they've been trained for centuries. But that's their weakness. The room fell silent as Dave's words hung in the air. No one understood what he meant. Not yet, anyway. To them, it sounded like a bluff. How could anyone possibly think they could go toe-to-toe with the Xenar warrior? But Dave wasn't bluffing. He wasn't even worried. Ambassador Rachel Kwan, who had been watching the exchange in disbelief, was the first to speak. What do you mean by their weakness? Her tone was sharp, her patience thinning. Dave grinned wider, a glint of mischief in his eyes. The Xenar are predictable. They're conditioned to fight a certain way, to think a certain way. They're experts in combat, sure, but they've never had to face anyone who doesn't follow the rules. That's where I come in. He paused, letting the words settle before continuing. I'll fight the way humans fight. Unpredictable, scrappy, brutal. No code, no honor, just survival. The Xenar envoy, clearly irritated, stepped forward. You speak of survival. You speak of unpredictability. But you are weak. You are soft. You have no true strength. I'm not weak, Dave interrupted. His voice was cold and steady, with a quiet confidence that sent a shiver through the room. I've survived things that would break anyone else. I didn't get where I am by following someone else's rules. And I'm not gonna die by playing by the Xenars. He turned to the envoy, his eyes locking onto the reptilian gaze with unwavering resolve. I'll fight my way. Rachel Kwan couldn't hide her frustration anymore. You're making a mistake, Dave. This isn't about the fight. It's about what comes after. If you lose, Earth loses. This trial will decide our place in the galaxy, and you're throwing it all away for what? Some twisted sense of pride. Dave shook his head slowly, as if he had anticipated this conversation. You're wrong, Rachel. It's not about pride. It's about proving something. It's about showing the galaxy that we're not some weak species waiting to be wiped out. We're humans. We survive. We adapt. And we fight when no one thinks we stand a chance. The Xenar envoy snorted, shaking his head in disdain. You cannot even comprehend what you are up against. The Unbroken will tear you apart. You will not survive. You keep saying that, Dave said, looking the envoy in the eye. But I'm still standing. And when I get in that ring, I'll show your champion just how dangerous a human can be. As the words left his mouth, the room went silent once again. Commander Grant stood up slowly, his face a mixture of concern and disbelief. You really believe you can beat him, don't you? Dave didn't hesitate. I don't just believe it. I know it. President Langley, who had been quiet until now, spoke up, his voice filled with a weary resolve. And if you lose, Dave, if you die, what does that mean for humanity? What happens to us? I'm not going to lose, Dave said, his voice low but filled with certainty. But if I do, then at least humanity will have gone down fighting. And that's something the galaxy will remember. The Xenar envoy let out a low growl, clearly annoyed by the entire conversation. Enough talk. The trial of dominance will take place soon. You will see for yourselves the power of the Xenar. As the envoy turned to leave, Dave watched him closely. Something about the Xenar's confidence was unsettling, yet he couldn't shake the feeling that the envoy was underestimating humanity. That's what the Xenar always did. They thought they had the answers, but they didn't understand humans. They didn't understand that humanity didn't need to follow the rules to win. They didn't need to be the strongest or the most experienced. They just needed to be smart enough to survive. The day of the trial arrived quickly. The Xenar's challenge was simple: one human and one Xenar, in a battle for dominance. The rules were straightforward. There were no rules. No weapons. No armor. Just bare-knuckle, brutal combat. The arena was set, and Dave was ready. The entire planet seemed to hold its breath in anticipation, waiting to see if humanity's fate would be sealed by one man's reckless decision. As Dave stepped into the arena, the air felt thick with tension. Across from him, HFY Unbroken stood, towering and imposing, his muscles rippling with power. He was everything the Xenar envoy had promised: fearsome, strong, and undeniably terrifying. He cracked his knuckles, staring down at Dave with an expression that could only be described as disdain. But Dave wasn't afraid. The roar of the crowd echoed in his ears, but he didn't hear it. His focus was absolute, his mind clear. He knew that he wasn't just fighting for his life. He was fighting for humanity's future, and he wasn't about to let that slip through his fingers. As the bell rang, signaling the beginning of the trial, Dave lunged forward, not with the precision of a trained soldier, but with the raw, unrefined desperation of a human who knew exactly what was at stake. His first move was reckless, but it was unpredictable. HFY Unbroken, expecting something more refined, was caught off guard as Dave's fist slammed into his chest with surprising force. The Xenar champion staggered back, his expression one of shock and confusion. It was only for a moment, but it was enough. In that fleeting instant, Dave saw the weakness, the flaw, in the Xenar's perfect system. And that's when the real fight began. The unpredictable fight. The moment the bell rang, signaling the start of the trial of dominance, the atmosphere in the arena shifted. The crowd's roar was deafening, but Dave couldn't hear it. His mind was a focused blur, the stakes clear in his mind. This wasn't just a fight for survival, it was a battle for humanity's place in the galaxy. Every movement, every decision had to count. There was no room for hesitation, no room for doubt. Across from him stood HFY Unbroken, the Xenar champion. The Xenar were known throughout the galaxy for their unparalleled physical strength and centuries of battle expertise. HFY Unbroken was a living legend. 3 meters tall, a wall of muscle and dense, armored scales that were said to be as tough as the hardest metals in the galaxy. His eyes glowed with the eerie light of a predator, and his fangs gleamed as he bared them, clearly sizing up his opponent with disdain. He had faced warriors from across the stars, but he had never faced someone like Dave. And that was his first mistake. Dave didn't wait. He didn't give HFY Unbroken the chance to make the first move. The moment the bell sounded, Dave charged forward like a whirlwind, unrestrained and raw. It wasn't a graceful move. It wasn't calculated or refined. It was pure instinct, pure human ingenuity at work. He threw his entire body into the attack, knowing that his only chance was to make the Xenar warrior think he wasn't a threat, to catch him off guard. HFY Unbroken was fast, but Dave was faster than he expected. The Xenar staggered backward, clearly surprised by the sudden, reckless charge. Dave's fist collided with the side of HFY Unbroken's chest, the impact resounding like a thunderclap. The Xenar champion stumbled, but quickly regained his balance, his reptilian eyes narrowing in disbelief. No human had ever landed a hit on him like that. The Xenar roared, a deep guttural sound that reverberated through the arena. He was enraged now, and his movements became more deliberate, more deadly. He lunged at Dave with terrifying speed, his claws outstretched and his massive body moving like a blur. Dave didn't flinch. He ducked, narrowly avoiding the first swipe of the Xenar's claws, and spun around, using his momentum to send a knee straight into the warrior's midsection. The force of the blow made HFY Unbroken grunt, but he didn't fall. Instead, he turned, a look of fury in his eyes, and grabbed Dave by the neck, lifting him off the ground with a single powerful hand. The crowd gasped, and for a moment, it seemed as though Dave's fate had been sealed. But Dave wasn't done. He wasn't about to go down so easily. As HFY Unbroken held him in the air, Dave twisted his body, his legs kicking out to strike the Xenar's arm, using every bit of his body weight to break the hold. It was a desperate, last-ditch effort, but it worked. The Xenar staggered back, and Dave dropped to the ground, gasping for breath. "Is that all you've got?" Dave muttered to himself, though he knew it was a lie. His muscles burned, his body screamed in pain, but he wasn't going to stop. He couldn't stop. Not when everything was on the line. The Zinar growled in frustration, his claws flexing as he prepared for another attack. But this time, Dave wasn't going to wait. He was going to fight on his terms. He darted to the side, keeping low, knowing that if he tried to go head-to-head with the Zinar again, he wouldn't survive. Instead, he began to use the arena to his advantage. It wasn't much, just a few scattered pieces of debris, but Dave had learned the value of improvisation in every fight he'd ever been in. The Unbroken charged again, and Dave sidestepped, grabbing a large piece of scrap metal from the arena floor and throwing it directly into the Zinar's face. It wasn't a devastating blow, but it was enough to make the Unbroken hesitate. The Zinar recoiled, momentarily blinded by the debris, and Dave saw his opportunity. He lunged forward, delivering a series of quick strikes to the Zinar's side, aiming for the weak spots where the scales were thinner. It wasn't a strategy based on power. It wasn't about brute force. It was about understanding his opponent's limitations, about exploiting the things that made the Zinar warrior predictable. He didn't need to match the Unbroken's strength. He just needed to outsmart him. The Zinar shook off the blow, his rage growing with every hit he took. But Dave could see the confusion in his eyes. The Unbroken had expected a battle of strength, a contest of endurance. What he didn't expect was to be fighting someone who wasn't bound by the same rules. Someone who didn't fight like a warrior, but like a human. "Come on, big guy," Dave taunted, breathless but defiant. "Is that all you've got?" The Unbroken roared again, more ferociously this time, and charged with terrifying speed. Dave didn't have time to think. He dropped to the ground, rolling out of the way just in time to avoid the Zinar's crushing fist. The force of the punch shattered the ground where Dave had just been standing, sending debris flying through the air. Dave didn't wait for the Zinar to recover. He scrambled to his feet and charged, but this time, he didn't go for a direct attack. Instead, he used the Unbroken's momentum against him. As the Zinar swung his massive arms, Dave ducked under the strike and drove his shoulder into the warrior's midsection, pushing him back with everything he had. The Zinar staggered, and for a moment, Dave saw a flicker of doubt in his opponent's eyes. The Zinar were strong, yes, but they were also predictable. They had never faced anyone who would fight with sheer, unrelenting unpredictability. They had never faced a human who fought like they had nothing to lose. Dave's vision blurred with exhaustion, but his resolve remained unbroken. He couldn't afford to stop. The Zinar would never stop, and neither could he. With a deep breath, he launched himself at the Unbroken once again, his body a blur of movement, pushing past the pain, pushing past the fear. The Zinar champion swung his massive fist in a deadly arc, but Dave was already there. He didn't go for the body. He aimed for the head, the only part of the Unbroken that wasn't protected by the tough, scale-like armor. It was a risky move, one that could end the fight in a split second, but Dave knew it was his only chance. With everything he had left, Dave drove his fist into the side of the Unbroken's head, the force of the blow causing the Zinar to stagger, disoriented. It wasn't a knockout blow. Not yet. But it was enough. For the first time in the fight, the Unbroken seemed to falter. His grip on the battle, on his dominance, was slipping. And that, Dave realized, was all he needed. The moment the Zinar lost their certainty, their control, was the moment humanity could win. The unpredictable nature of humanity, the willingness to adapt, to break the rules, was their true weapon. And in this fight, that was all that mattered. As the Unbroken tried to steady himself, Dave saw the opening he'd been waiting for. It was time to finish this.